pleasant, sometimes useful to look back and trace the turns and windings through which we have passed. Now, I was not born in America. I actually came from England. And it was there in England where my passion for America grew. For in that, I was born in 1737 in Thetford, Norfolk, England. My father, he was a staymaker and a Quaker, and my mother, an Anglican. As a youth, we were not wealthy, so I saw how the poor were treated. I even asked, because I saw that they were even sometimes punished very harshly for the most frivolous and minor of crimes and offenses. And I had asked my parents, why is it that any but the poor are only executed? They could not give me an answer. What answer could there be to give for something like that? But also, what made this so was that there were a couple of parties in power, the Whigs that were struggling and believed in a constitutional monarchy, but then also the Tories, who believed in hereditary succession and were fiercely loyal to the king. When George III reigned, the Tories were in power. Now, I had attended school up to 13, but then apprenticed with my father. And I'm not going to go into too much of my past, as that's not much I was comfortable talking about. I had lost a wife and child in childbirth. But as it was written and said, I was many things for a time being: a staymaker, an exciseman or tax collector, street preacher, school teacher, tobacconist, and grocer. But I had the opportunity when in London to attend lectures at the Royal Society, and I perused their libraries, and I gained a university's worth of education. And it was also with that in mind and the connections I made with many of those who were involved in the causes related to the Whigs that I took on and wrote in defense of our rights as excisemen for better pay, and wrote a case of the officers of excise. But overall, it did not work out in that sense, because it meant I got dismissed or sacked for not being at my station. But while I had made these connections with the Whigs, England in it also had been from time to time a wheel of disappointment. And it was from there that my connections with those in the Royal Society and the lectures I had attended and participated in myself, I was able to meet and come to the attention of America's ambassador to England, Dr. Benjamin Franklin. Dr. Franklin was aware of my writings, and he advised and suggested that I travel to America. I deeply respected Dr. Franklin, but could I leave home on this new journey that he was calling me to? I'd been a sailor for a year, but this was traveling to new territory. But I could stay here and face the risk of more disappointments and predictable disappointments, or I could start afresh, go to a new world that he was saying that I should go to. In my heart, I knew what the answer would be. Therefore, I set out upon this new journey to get a fresh start in the colonies in America, to help out however I could. And Dr. Franklin provided me letters of introduction. And although I was hoping for a fresh start in the colonies, the journey over could be considered anything but fresh. Several of us on the way over caught typhoid fever, and I was carried ashore and to begin my new life on a stretcher because I was so ill. But I had those letters of introduction that I could share with Dr. Franklin's connections to get started. But I recovered from that abyss of my illness, and now in Philadelphia, I set out upon my new life. In short, I became a citizen of Pennsylvania, and with meeting the Philadelphia printer, Robert Aiken, over time, I became the editor of the Pennsylvania magazine. Now, it had started out as non-political, but I brought in and started overseeing essays that had a more social or political message to it. And I published articles dealing with the aberration of slavery in the colonies, the savagery of dueling, and women's mistreatment. I could not stand or abide misjustice or those picked upon and or abused. Perhaps this was something embedded in me from childhood, but it was also there that in Mr. Aiken's shop, I met, as with Dr. Franklin, my other guide and possible mentor, Philadelphia's best-known physician, Dr. Benjamin Rush, who would also be a signer of the forthcoming Declaration of Independence. He knew I was of my writings and Now, keep in mind, a lot of us at this time had to use pseudonyms like Vox Populi or Aesop because we needed to hide our names to protect ourselves against any legal actions or revenge or retaliation. But he knew me, he knew where my passion was. And at the slave market across from us, where they were selling those enslaved like cattle, Dr. Rush and I both observed and shared how disgusted we were with it. And we were disgusted with everything that was going wrong in the colonies. Because it was that in mind, I took an increasing interest in our conflict with Britain. I published thoughts on a defensive war, but I may have also added a few thoughts of my own that was reflecting my conflict with my past Quaker pacifist background, where I had said that I would gladly lay aside the use of arms and settle matters by negotiation. But unless the whole will, I take up my musket and thank heaven he has put it into my power. But troubles with England had been ongoing. For many years, the colonies had suffered under ridiculous taxes on a variety of items and had little to no, or as they called it, virtual representation in Parliament. I could relate. But especially with the influence of the Tories or the Loyalists, reconciliation was always thought to be the answer. All of us, including me, were not being fully aware of the grounds of the situation. I wrote that independence was a doctrine scarce and rare, even towards the conclusion of the year 1775. All our politics had been founded on the hope of expectation of making the matter up, a hope which, though general on the side of America, had never entered the head or heart of the British court. Their hope was conquest and confiscation. And I thought it very hard to have the country set on fire about my years almost the moment I got into it. But tensions came to their full when militiamen and British troops encountered each other and British troops fired upon the militiamen at Lexington and Concord. The bloodshed infuriated me as I wrote, "No man was a warmer wisher for reconciliation than myself before the fatal 19th of April, 1775. But the moment the event of that day was made known, I rejected the hardened, sullen-tempered Pharaoh of England forever and disdained the wretch that with the pretended title of father of his people can unfeelingly hear of their slaughter and composedly sleep with their blood upon his soul." A second Continental Congress was formed with the hope of presenting an olive branch to the king to effect some form of reconciliation, but he rejected it. We were not being aware of what we needed to do, the chance to be free. One, John Adams convinced Congress to support Massachusetts' efforts, and now they take their army and expand it to a continental army, and to lead it, appoint Virginia's George Washington as commander-in-chief. Dr. Rush, for some time, had been trying to think of a way to reach those that were still on the fence about independence, but he was worried of any backlash that might come to him. And he knew my skill and ability in writing, so he turned to me to write something to persuade everyone, our countrywomen and men, of the importance of independence, that this was possible, that to come off the fence. But what could I do? What could I write? Dr. Rush gave me some ideas, but I also recalled in England, Methodist or street preachers speaking persuasively to passersby in language that the most common person could understand and relate to. Could I use that oratory and rhetoric to reach colonists still on the fence and undecided about independence? I would. I thought, therefore, to simply call it plain truth, but Dr. Rush recommended the even more fitting common sense, because no matter what rank of life or where we came from, it was something that we all possessed and all had within. I took the manuscript to a Whig publisher and donated the earnings on the first printing so it could go to the war effort to buy mittens for General Washington's army. And I had it published anonymously by an Englishman, this first printing. Other printings which I did not approve of and was not recompensed for did happen, but that is another story in and of itself. But the word was getting out. In fact, I used examples from the Bible and how worthless and awful the history of hereditary and useless the idea of hereditary monarchy or of any monarchy was, as an example of the worst in government, and why we should have a free government of equality for all. A little bit of what I wrote was that in the following pages, I offer nothing more than simple facts, plain arguments, and common sense, and have no other preliminaries to settle with the reader. The sun never shined on a cause of greater worth. It is not the affair of a city, a county, a province, or a kingdom, but of a continent, of at least 1/8 part of a habitable globe. I challenge the warmest advocate for reconciliation to show a single advantage that this continent can reap by being connected with Great Britain. I repeat the challenge. Not a single advantage is derived. Everything that is right or reasonable pleads for separation. The blood of the slain, the weeping voice of nature cries, "'Tis time to part." No one had heard these kinds of arguments before, not like this, so plainly against monarchy. Copies sold from 120,000 to 150,000. It was read by public men, repeated in clubs, spouted in schools, and in one instance, delivered from the pulpit instead of a sermon by a clergyman in Connecticut, as stated by Dr. Rush. And now, eventually, as time makes more converts than reason, soon after much debate, Congress would agree for independence. A committee of 5 was formed to produce such a specific declaration officially to be sent to England, and so that other countries would know we were officially declaring independence. The 5 of this committee included Virginia's Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Robert Livingston, Roger Sherman, and Dr. Franklin. Now, it's good to consider that, as I did try to be discreet in my writing, let us consider this, though, that Dr. Franklin, who was ill with gout at the time it first started, he might have turned to me and the drafting process to be in the room with the others, whom he now called his politically adopted son, to unofficially assist in getting this started, because an early draft was sent for review, as Adams wrote of it, a beginning, perhaps, with TP's permission. Those were my initials. But whether, and also because as I was not a member of Congress and could not be doing its business, and it was not a good idea that I should be known officially that I might be helping. Either way, I had stated as much in my book, Common Sense, and the ideas shared amongst the writers of the Declaration of Independence. And from there, Jefferson would draft, and with revision from Adams and Dr. Franklin, he would put together and author the final document, but help from all of us. But he would author the final document, and on July 2nd, Congress declared independence, and on the 4th, it approved Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. I knew, though, that I had to become involved, not just in my writing, but in my actions, with my musket and horse. And so I rode out to join in the battle for independence. I volunteered with the Pennsylvania Flying Camp, meaning by this to fly from one battle to another to support other troops. I was even named aide-de-camp of Major General Nathaniel Greene, whom he and I would become very close. We assembled about a force of 2,500 men, but at that time, British and Hessian or German soldiers crossed the bay and came into the colonies and pushed back against the rebel forces. They drove us on, and then we soldiered into Newark into the fall and winter. And now that the men that remained counted barely 3,000. Soon, because they were saying their enlistment periods were at an end and they wanted to go home, and many now felt that the war effort was over. Perhaps it was better to receive the king's terms of mercy and return to being subjects of England and his majesty. We are at our lowest point. The cause of America was close to finish. The mood was that many were ready to give up. The wheel of disappointment that had followed me from England came here. It was as if then, no, this couldn't be it. Now more than ever, we needed to stand. I didn't come to these shores half dead, carried on a stretcher, and then when I revived, rally and push myself and drain myself with all my energy to support this fight for independence. Now was the time we needed to make our stand. General Washington was planning a surprise attack on a town, Trenton, that was held by the Hessians. He had the plan because he was hoping that it would inspire troop morale and for those to stay in the cause. He had the plan, but who would provide the heart? Perhaps it was now time to try to pull up the muse as best I could, and I sat down with my musket in my lap on the head of the drum to write out everything I could to inspire our countrymen and women to stay the course. I gained leave to go back and oversee publication of my new essay that I had written that would lay out our American crisis, for so it was, and sign it simply Common Sense. I returned home to Christmas and provided both General Washington and Greene copies of this new essay. We needed to win, or this was it. It was also said they were so moved that they had those letters and essays that I had written and pamphlets sent around to be read to these soldiers as they were getting ready to take on the icy waters and cross the Delaware to take Trenton back from the Hessians. Here is some of what they heard or read. I tried my best to speak to the troubled and wearied soldiers and all our countrywomen and men to rekindle their fires. For while the captains read the words, my voice spoke through them of the graveness of this hour. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives everything its value. Heaven knows how to put a proper price upon its goods. And it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated. Why is it that the enemy have left the New England provinces and made these middle ones the seat of war? The answer is easy. New England is not infested with Tories, and we are. And what is a Tory? Good God, what is he? Not be afraid to go with 100 Whigs against 1,000 Tories should they attempt to get into arms. Every Tory is a coward, for servile, slavish, self-interested fear is the foundation of Toryism. And a man under such influence, though he may be cruel, never can be brave. I once felt all that kind of anger which a man ought to feel against the mean principles that are held by the Tories. A noted one who kept the tavern at Amboy was standing at his door with as pretty a child in his hand, about 8 or 9 years old as I ever saw. And after speaking his mind as freely as he thought was prudent, finished with this unfatherly expression, "Well, give me peace in my day." Not a man lives on the continent but fully believes that a separation must sometime or other finally take place. And a generous parent would have said, if there must be trouble, let it be in my day, that my child may have peace. And this single reflection, well applied, is sufficient to awaken every man to duty. I call not upon a few, but upon all, not on this state or that state, but on every state. Up and help us. Lay your shoulders to the wheel. Better to have too much force than too little when so great an object is at stake. Let it be told to the future world that in the depth of winter, when nothing but hope and virtue could survive, that the city and the country, alarmed at one common danger, came forth to meet and to repulse it. It matters not where you live or what rank of life you hold. The evil or the blessing will reach you all. The far and the near, the home counties and the back, the rich and the poor will suffer or rejoice alike. The heart that feels not now is dead. The blood of his children will curse his cowardice, who shrinks back at a time when a little might have saved the whole and made them happy. I love the man that can smile in trouble and gather strength from distress and grow brave by reflection. 'Tis the business of little minds to shrink, but he whose heart is firm and whose conscience approves his conduct will pursue his principles unto death. My own line of reasoning is to myself as straight and clear as a ray of light. Not all the treasures of the world, so far as I believe, could have induced me to support an offensive war, for I think it murder. But if a thief breaks into my house, burns and steals my property, and kills or threatens to kill me or those that are in it, am I to suffer it? What signifies it to me whether he who does it is a king or a common man, my countrymen or not my countrymen, whether it be done by an individual villain or an army of them? Let them call me rebel and welcome. I feel no concern from it, but I should suffer the misery of devils, were I to make a whore of my soul by swearing allegiance to one whose character is that of a sottish, stupid, stubborn, worthless, brutish man. I conceive likewise of a horrid idea in receiving mercy from a being who at the last days shall be shrieking to the rocks and mountains to cover him and fleeing with terror from the orphan, the widow, and the slain of America. There are cases which cannot be overdone by language, and this is one. By perseverance and fortitude, we have the prospect of a glorious issue. By cowardice and submission, the sad choice of a variety of evils. A ravaged country, a depopulated city, habitations without safety, slavery without hope. Look on this picture and weep over it. And if there yet remains one thoughtless wretch who believes it not, let him suffer it unlamented. Now to move for Trenton. The next hours would not end, but nonetheless determine the very course of the rest of this war and future as a nation. We were on the very pivot point, or as our shared code more simply and aptly stated, victory or death. Very apt. The waning hours of Christmas night, we gathered into boats, approximately 2,400 in all, into the icy and horrible rivers of the Delaware, trying to cross the snow and sleet with General Washington in the lead. But we did not make the hour appointed time we wanted to arrive. No matter, we had to move forward. All came to land at 3, and we trudged on into the snow. Some soldiers even without shoes. Sadly, a couple froze to death. There was only blackness in front of us for much of the time, but we moved on. Sometimes in the blackness, the only thing the soldiers could hear was General Washington riding up to them, saying, for God's sake, keep up with your men. Soon, 8 o'clock, we came into Trenton with our muskets and bayonets and moved up King Street, firing at anything in sight. The Hessians came out. Now, they were not drunk from Christmas night revelries, as sometimes is told in legend. These that we were up against were a trained, efficient, and disciplined group of men. But we did our best and stayed the course. The Hessians came rushing out of their homes and barracks to meet us out in the streets. The war drums beat and the band would play, and while the Hessians tried to organize, we pushed them further, while a young officer, Alexander Hamilton, leading the charge. The Hessians tried to roll out a field gun, but it was seized by a half-dozen Virginians, led by Commander Washington's distant cousin, Captain William Washington, and Lieutenant James Monroe. And soon they turned the field gun on the Hessians. But then their leader, Colonel Rao, came out on a horse, trying to lead the charge. But amidst all the shooting, the line faltered. And soon Colonel Rao himself was hit, fell from his horse. He was taken back into the house where he was staying and died shortly after. After a savage 45 minutes, the Hessians found themselves surrounded by our troops in a field and an orchard, and surrendered and lay down their arms. 21 had been killed, 90 wounded, and we had taken several prisoners. However, only 4 of our Americans had been wounded. And elated Washington's men moved on to Princeton, but by this point, the British High Command had become aware of Trenton's fall. Washington ordered a false encampment set up some miles outside the city. Therefore, when the British moved in to attack the encampment made of tents, the Patriots took and seized Princeton. With this victory, Congress returned to Philadelphia, and a surge of confidence was restored for our cause and in our troops and citizens. I knew best now I could do more with my pen, and continued several more essays in this series called The American Crisis. I even addressed the second one to Admiral Richard Howe, the British general, saying, "Perhaps you thought America was taking a nap. The United States of America will sound as pompously in the world or in history as the Kingdom of Great Britain." Perhaps the first time this phrase was uttered. The United States of America, our title. The war would rage on for several more years, with the tide turning for and against us. But with Trenton and Princeton, the pendulum eventually fully swung, to our favor. I very briefly served as secretary in a committee for foreign affairs. I did not serve on it long because I spoke out and wrote out against those I felt were profiting from the war. That's not what this was about. The goal was independence, not profit. But I was able to also travel to France to secure more financial aid, as we had assistance from her and other countries in our cause. I was also finally able to serve as clerk on the Pennsylvania Assembly, where I was deeply pleased to see and be a part of America's first act in putting a stop and abolishing slavery, at least in Pennsylvania. Soon, the war ended, and for my troubles, eventually I was awarded a Loyalist farm in New Rochelle, New York. I want to be getting on with some other endeavors, as I have a passion for science and inventions, such as a smokeless candle, a wrought iron bridge, which nobody has seen before. But I feel I may always be involved in the affairs of the people, not only in America, but all over, as I would see it as my country, though that the world is my country, my religion to do good. I lack any ability to hold my tongue when I see abuses in power by those, whether they be in a government or in religion or any other field. I feel compelled to speak out. Some rough, rewarding, but also turbulent times may be ahead. Our new nation still had much to do, but 1783, on the anniversary of when our revolution began, with those shots fired in Lexington and Concord, I wrote this final, the 13th crisis, and felt glad to offer some closure to this chapter for America and for myself, for now. The times that tried men's souls are over, and the greatest and completest revolution the world ever knew is gloriously and happily accomplished. It was the cause of America that made me a writer, an author. Independence always appeared to me practicable and probable, provided the sentiment of the country could be formed and held to the object. But as the scenes of war are closed, and every man preparing for home and happier times, I therefore take my leave of the subject. I have most sincerely followed it from beginning to end, and through all its turns and windings. And whatever country I may hereafter be in, I shall always feel an honest pride at the part I have taken and acted, and a gratitude to nature and Providence for putting it in my power to be of some use to mankind. Common Sense, Philadelphia, April 19th, 1783. Thank you. Oh, Becca, I don't think we can hear you.
How about now?
Got it.
Thank you. Sorry. I do want to thank you, Jim, for the performance tonight. I want to thank everybody else for joining us. If you missed any bit of it, or if you want to watch it again, we are recording it. So keep an eye out on our Facebook page. We will post it there. And if you have any more questions about Thomas Paine, or you're interested in anything he's written, take a look at the library. We can help you find something. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you again, Jim.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it.